So they are in this beautiful spot, very well described by the author. But at the end of what I read yesterday, we must go now, children. Mrs. Whatsit's voice was deep with sadness, and Meg could not understand. Raising her head, Mrs. Whatsit gave a call that seemed to be a command, and one of the creatures flying above the trees nearest them raised its head to listen, and then flew off and picked 3 flowers from a tree growing near the river and brought them over. Each of you take one, Mrs. Whatsit said. I'll tell you how to use them later. As Meg took her flower, she realized that it was not a single blossom, but hundreds of tiny flowerets, forming a kind of hollow bell. Where are we going? Calvin asked. Up. The wings moved steadily, swiftly. The garden was left behind, the stretch of granite, the mighty shapes, and then Mrs. Whatsit was flying upward, climbing steadily up, up. If I can do this. I'm sorry, kids. There. Hopefully oh my gosh. What a way to ruin a story. All right. Up, up. Below them, the trees of the mountain dwindled, became sparse, were replaced by bushes, and then small, dry grasses, and then vegetation ceased entirely. And there were only rocks, points and peaks of rock, sharp and dangerous. Hold on tight, Mrs. Whatsit said. Don't slip. Meg felt Calvin's arms circle her waist in a secure hold. Still they moved upward. Now they were in clouds. They could see nothing but drifting whiteness, and the moisture clung to them and condensed in tiny droplets. As Meg shivered, Calvin's grip tightened. In front of her, Charles Wallace sat quietly. Once he turned just long enough to give her a swift glance of tenderness and concern. But Meg felt as each moment passed that he was growing farther and farther away, that he was becoming less and less her adored baby brother, and more one with whatever kind of being Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which in actuality were. Abruptly they burst out of the clouds into a shaft of light. Below them there were still rocks. Above them the rocks continued to reach up into the sky, but now, though it seemed miles upward, Meg could see where the mountain at last came to an end. Mrs. Whatsit continued to climb, her wings straining a little. Meg felt her heart racing. Cold sweat began to gather on her face, and her lips felt as though they were turning blue. She began to gasp. All right, children, use your flowers now, Mrs. Whatsit said. The atmosphere will continue to get thinner from now on. Hold the flowers up to your face and breathe through them, and they will give you enough oxygen. It won't be as much as you're used to, but it will be enough. Meg had almost forgotten the flowers, and was grateful to realize that she was still clasping them, that she hadn't let them fall from her fingers. She pressed her face into the blossoms and breathed deeply. Calvin still held her with one arm, but he too held the flowers to his face. Charles Wallace moved the hand with the flowers slowly, almost as though he were in a dream. Mrs. Whatsit's wings strained against the thinness of the atmosphere. The summit was only a little way above them, and then they were there. Mrs. Whatsit came to rest on a small plateau of smooth silvery rock. There ahead of them was a great white disk. One of Uriel's moons, Mrs. Whatsit told them, her mighty voice faintly breathless. Oh, it's beautiful, Meg cried. It's beautiful. The silver light from the enormous moon poured over them, blending with the golden quality of the day, flowing over the children, over Mrs. Whatsit, over the mountain peak. Now we will turn around, Mrs. Whatsit said, and at the quality of her voice, Meg was afraid again. But when they turned, she saw nothing. Ahead of them was the thin, clear blue sky. Below them, the rocks thrusting out of the shifting sea of white clouds. Now we will wait, Mrs. Whatsit said, for sunset and moonset. Almost as she spoke, the light began to deepen, to darken. I want to watch the moon set, Charles Wallace said. No, child. Do not turn around, any of you. Face out toward the dark. What I have to show you will be more visible then. Look ahead, straight ahead, as far as you can possibly look. Meg's eyes ached from the strain of looking and seeing nothing. Then above the clouds which encircled the mountain, she seemed to see a shadow, a faint thing of darkness so far off that she was scarcely sure she was really seeing it. Charles Wallace said, "What's that?" "That sort of shadow out there," Calvin gestured. "What is it?" "I don't like it." "Watch," Mrs. Whatsit commanded. It was a shadow. Nothing but a shadow. It was not even as tangible as a cloud. Was it cast by something, or was it a thing in itself? The sky darkened. The gold left the light, and they were surrounded by blue, blue deepening until where there had been nothing but the evening sky, there was now a faint pulse of star, and then another, and another, and another. There are more stars than Meg had ever seen before. "The atmosphere is so thin here," Mrs. Whatsit said, as though in answer to her unasked question, "that it does not obscure your vision as it would at home. Now look. Look straight ahead." Meg looked. The dark shadow was still there. It had not lessened or dispersed with the coming of night, and where the shadow was, the stars were not visible. What could there be about a shadow that was so terrible that she knew that there had never been before, or ever would again be, anything that would chill her with a fear that was beyond shuddering, beyond crying or screaming, beyond the possibility of comfort? Meg's hand, holding the blossom, slowly dropped, and it seemed as though a knife gashed through her lungs. She gasped, but there was no air for her to breathe. Darkness glazed her eyes and mind, but as she started to fall into unconsciousness, her head dropped down into the flowers, which she was still clutching. And as she inhaled the fragrance of their purity, her mind and body revived, and she sat up again. The shadow was still there, dark and dreadful. Calvin held her hand strongly in his, but she felt neither strength nor reassurance in his touch. Beside her, tremor went through Charles Wallace, but he sat very still. He should be seeing this, Meg thought. This is too much. He shouldn't be seeing this, Meg thought. This is too much for so little a boy, no matter how different and extraordinary a little boy. Calvin turned, rejecting the dark thing that blotted out the light of the stars. "Make it go away, Mrs. Whatsit," he whispered. "Make it go away. It's evil." Slowly the great creature turned around so that the shadow was behind them, so that they saw only the stars unobscured, the soft throb of starlight on the mountain, the descending circle of the great moon swiftly slipping over the horizon. Then, without a word from Mrs. Whatsit, they were traveling downward, down, down. When they reached the corona of clouds, Mrs. Whatsit said, "You can breathe without the flowers now, my children." Silence again. Not a word. It was as though the shadow had somehow reached out with its dark power and touched them so that they were incapable of speech. When they got back to the flowery field, bathed now in starlight, the moonlight from another, smaller, yellowing, rising moon, a little of the tenseness went out of their bodies, and they realized that the body of the beautiful creature on which they rode had been as rigid as theirs. With a graceful gesture, it dropped to the ground and folded its great wings. Charles Wallace was the first to slide off. "Mrs. Who? Mrs. Which?" he called, and there was an immediate quivering in the air. Mrs. Who's familiar glasses gleamed at them. Mrs. Which appeared too, but, as she had told the children, it was difficult for her to materialize completely. And though there was the robe and peaked hat, Meg could look through them to the mountain and the stars. She slid off Mrs. Whatsit's back and walked, rather unsteadily, after the long ride over to Mrs. Which. "That dark thing we saw," she said. "Is that what my father is fighting?" The end for today.